Don't be dramatic, Harold. It's just smoke, my daughter-in-law snapped, flicking ash into the sink like she owned the place. I'm a heart patient, I said calmly, my voice barely above a whisper. You know that. Just take it outside. She exhaled through her nose like a bull. Well, maybe you shouldn't be so sensitive. We all have to live here. I looked at my son, hoping he'd step in. Hoping he'd remember the man who raised him alone after his mother passed. But instead, he slammed his beer can on the table. Shut up, Dad. Honestly, you smell worse than cigarettes. Then he did something I never thought he was capable of. He hit me. Not hard enough to knock me down, but hard enough to send a message. I stood there in stunned silence, one hand on the edge of the table. And his wife smirked like she'd won a prize. Maybe it's time you moved into that old folks' home, she said, grabbing another smoke. 15 minutes later, I quietly walked to my room. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just reached for the drawer under my bed and pulled out a small black folder they'd forgotten existed. The deed, the trust, the account, and the camera. Because while they were playing house, I'd been quietly recording everything. When you live long enough, you learn one thing. Silence sees everything. For 2 years, I'd watched the way they spoke to me when they thought I was just old. I saw my son become a man I didn't recognize, cold, careless, lost in his wife's shadow. And her? The day she moved in, she started pushing me out. Subtly at first, changed the locks, stopped inviting me to family dinners, even tried to move my medication drawer. But this time, they crossed a line. I plugged the hidden camera's memory card into my old laptop. There it was, crystal clear footage of my son raising his hand, of her smiling at it. And then I opened the folder I'd kept for years, copies of the property deed, the house trust, and the living will. The house wasn't in my son's name. It never had been. My wife made sure of that before she passed. Bless her. I just never enforced it. Until now. I drove to my lawyer's office the next morning, dropped everything on his desk and said, "Execute the transfer clause." He looked up. "Are you sure, Harold?" "They want me gone," I said. "Let's make it official." He smiled sadly and nodded. That night I slept soundly for the first time in years. Because they thought they'd cornered me. But they never checked whose name was carved into the walls they stood behind. The morning eviction notice arrived 2 days later. Taped to the front door. Certified. Legal. Irrefutable. My son was pacing the living room in sweatpants when he read it. His voice cracked like glass. "What the hell is this? You're evicting us." I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea. "It's not eviction," I said. "It's reclamation." His wife stormed in next, clutching her phone. "This is illegal. You gifted this house to us when we got married." "No," I replied evenly. "You moved into my home. I never signed over a single brick." He stared at me like I was a stranger. "Where are we supposed to go?" I shrugged. "You're young. Resourceful. That's what you always said, right?" He stepped closer, face red, fists clenched. For a moment I thought he might hit me again. But this time I didn't flinch. Because behind him, a sheriff's deputy was walking up the steps. I'd called ahead. He handed over the final 7-day notice with a quiet nod. His wife exploded. "You can't do this. We're family." "No," I said softly, standing up. "Family doesn't smile while someone gets hit for asking to breathe." They had 7 days. But I gave them 5. Because when you treat your father like a burden, don't be surprised when he stops carrying you. The next few days were oddly quiet. Too quiet. They avoided me around the house, tiptoeing like squatters waiting to be caught. My son stayed glued to his phone. His wife whispered frantically into hers, pacing the hallway like a caged wolf. On day 4 she finally snapped. "This is abuse. You're kicking your own family onto the street during the holidays." I looked up from my chair in the sunroom. Funny. When I asked not to be poisoned in my own home, no one called that abuse. She sputtered. "We have rights." "You had rent-free housing," I said. "You had heat, food, and peace. And you spit on all of it." Her eyes narrowed. "You're doing this for revenge." "No," I said, folding the newspaper slowly. "I'm doing it for freedom." And that's when my son walked in holding a stack of papers. "You can't evict us," he said. "This house is part of Mom's estate." I checked. "You didn't clear that inheritance." I smiled. "I didn't have to." Then I reached behind my chair and handed him a document with both our signatures. A legal amendment I'd filed years ago, co-signed by his mother. The house was protected by a survivorship clause. I was the sole owner the second she passed. They had no claim. No argument. No home. They tried to treat me like a relic. But they forgot who built the castle they now begged to stay in. And I was done handing out keys. They packed in silence. No tantrums this time. No screaming. Just the sound of boxes being taped shut and drawers slamming harder than needed. It rained the morning they left. Poetic, really. My son stood on the porch with a single duffel bag. No umbrella. No plan. His wife was in the car, arms crossed, avoiding my gaze. He turned to me one last time. His voice cracked. You really hate us that much? I sighed. I don't hate you, son. I hate what you became when you stopped being a son. He flinched like I'd slapped him. You hit your own father, I added, because I asked to breathe. That's not stress. That's rot. And I'm not living with rot. He opened his mouth but I shut the door. Behind it I exhaled. The silence didn't echo anymore. Later that day I called the trust advisor and rewrote my living will. Every clause, every dollar, reassigned. I donated 40% of the estate to the local veterans clinic. The rest? To a scholarship fund in my late wife's name. For kids who grew up without fathers but still turned out kind. Because my wealth was built by love. And I refused to let it rot in entitled hands that never learned to give. 3 weeks passed. I thought that would be the end of it, my son, his wife, and their entitlement banished from my life. But narcissists rarely go quietly. One morning I got a letter from a local law office. They were suing me, claiming I'd promised them the house as part of a verbal inheritance agreement. My first reaction? Laughter. Genuine, deep, from-the-gut laughter I hadn't felt in years. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. I was wondering when they'd get desperate, he said. I forwarded him everything. The eviction notice, the trust deed, the audio recordings I'd captured on my home smart system. Including one particularly nasty dinner where they joked about waiting for the old man to croak, so they could flip the house. The lawsuit died before it made it to a hearing. But the smear campaign started next. My son posted online claiming I was senile, abusive, dangerous. That I'd stolen his inheritance. People who didn't know me, who'd never even visited, left comments calling me a monster. And for a moment I felt the sting. Until I remembered something my wife once told me. The louder the liar, the emptier their pockets. So I opened a private blog and wrote the truth. Not for sympathy, but for legacy. Because the world should know what happens when the quiet ones fight back. The blog post went live on a Sunday night. I wrote it like a letter to my wife. Calm, honest, detailed. No attacks. Just facts. The photos of my bruised face. The forged paperwork attempts. The sheriff's report. Even the Christmas gift receipt for the $4,000 laptop they sold behind my back. Within a week it went viral on local Facebook groups. Strangers started commenting, not to shame me but to share their own stories of being mistreated by family. Of being used, gaslit, and discarded once they were no longer useful. I wasn't alone. And then came the call I never expected. It was from a reporter at the regional paper. She wanted to run a story, not gossip, but a full editorial on elder mistreatment, financial abuse, and the unseen strength of people who choose silence until they don't. I agreed. The headline ran 3 days later. The father they couldn't break. One man's quiet stand against entitled family abuse. By Thursday, donations poured into the veterans clinic in my wife's name. The scholarship fund got local press. And my mailbox? Filled with letters, from kids, widows, neighbors, all thanking me for proving that quiet doesn't mean weak. That week I sat by my wife's headstone. I'm okay now, I whispered. And they'll never break me again. It was quiet again. But this time the silence didn't ache. It healed. Spring came early that year. I planted my wife's favorite roses along the walkway, the same ones she used to cut and place in the kitchen window. The same ones my son said were too much work. One afternoon as I watered them, a car pulled into the driveway. A woman stepped out, mid-20s, nervous but determined. In her hand was a newspaper clipping. Mr. Hamilton? She asked. I read your story. My mom's boyfriend controls everything. Your words, they gave me courage. I invited her in. Mitty, listen. And just like that, the house became what it used to be, a place where people felt safe. Over the next few months, others came. A single father escaping emotional abuse. A war vet whose son drained his savings. I never asked for this role. But maybe it found me. The state even contacted me to help pilot a mentorship program for at-risk elders. My son never called again. Last I heard, they were living in a motel 2 counties over, still blaming everyone but themselves. But me? I was rebuilding, Not just a home but a legacy. One not written in money, but in the lives I helped unchain. I stood by my roses that evening, wind brushing my face, the sun dipping low. I kept my promise, I whispered to her. I never let them turn me bitter. I smiled and walked back inside.